unlike other cycles, economic cycles, we did not overbuild in the last economic cycle.
The Class A office space is the offices taken up by high-level finance, Citadel, Lloyd's, Santander, Apple, Microsoft, take your pick. So more Class A office at a high level means more people who make more money, who can buy more houses.
Yes, Miami has been a capital magnet rather than a capital creator for a very long time. But when you're talking about anything that is attached to ground or attached to land, talking about single-family homes and even townhouses, you cannot build many of those at all.
But it's very clear to me that that wealth migration is going to continue.
And you cannot replicate Miami, I think, anywhere else.
Welcome back for another episode of the Better Decisions podcast. I'm here again with Eli Beracha, good friend of mine and a market expert, someone whose mind is expanded beyond the normal reach of what realtors would typically understand and process. Eli is professor and director of the Hollow School of Real Estate at FIU, is also the founder of the Beracha investment group. Is that correct?
The Beracha team.
It's the Beracha team.
Consulting firm.
Yeah, you run a big consultancy team, and again, ultimately, you are, you're an analyst, and you really understand the fundamentals of real estate. And I wanted this episode to be something of I don't want to say simplistic, but I wanted to really break down the fundamentals of real estate. All too often we have a lot of people who come in and they talk about the real estate market and they get very, very granular, myself included. But I think it's helpful when we really understand the fundamentals of our markets. And I don't think they're often talked about enough. Sometimes we just gloss over it and make assumptions. So hopefully today we'll dive into this. And this is off the back of the React Real Estate Conference that we had a few weeks ago.
Yes. Great
conference. Thank you for allowing me to be the MC for that event. You came up on stage, and we're going to dive into some of your, incredible slides and detailed information that you have on the Florida market, because you've really analyzed this at an incredibly detailed level. But you've really explained the fundamentals really, really well. And I think that's something that I took away from that. So without further ado, let's go from macro to micro and really explain the fundamentals of the real estate market. Eli, let's start macro. Give us the state, as you said, the state of the US, where we are right now. It's now November 2024.
All right, David. So first of all, thank you for having me on the show again. I'm always happy to be here. And yes, I'd like to go into slightly a different kind of discussion today than we have in the past. So I like to start macro because, a lot of people probably put their life on pause until the presidential election. I think for many people, it was an excuse to not do anything. And by not doing anything, you're betting against America. So not being fully integrated, fully taking advantage of the U.S. economy, you're betting against America, whether you are doing it notably or you're noticing doing that or not. And I think that now that we do have a president-elect, whether you like the results or not, it's really relevant. The fact that people are going to move back into action, which is a good thing. So I think one of the first slides that I saw in the presentation was, why you should not bet against America. And going back centuries from, 1776 until today, you see the tremendous growth of the United States of America compared to almost any economy. That is kind of the long term. And then even if you're looking a lot shorter, so thinking, the last 30, 40, 50 years, how the U.S. grew in terms of the economic, production and the amount that we produce relative to, the G7, for example, is tremendous. We're just getting bigger and stronger over time. And you can always find reasons why not to invest, why not to participate. There's always something. There's always a risk. There's always a reason for people to not do something. But I think the first message is, okay, now we have presidential election behind us. Move back to action and do not bet against America. And the biggest sector of the U.S. economy is real estate. If you're looking at the amount of equity that Americans accumulate in all asset classes, including real estate is the largest by far. Right now, we're standing at roughly about $35 trillion of U.S. Equity just into housing and real estate, which is larger than the equity they have in any other class.
Explain that $35 trillion. This is all real estate across America. This is residential, commercial, everything.
Yes.
And this is all, as I said, owned by... Let's understand this asset class, because this is the thing that, understanding, okay, I invest in stocks, I buy a stock into a company, I'm getting a piece of company, the productivity of that company. The driving element and the growth, why do you think we see the value of real estate in America right now at this level relative to the global markets, $35 trillion?
Well, I think that, one of the main reasons why we saw such great appreciation of real estate over the last, it's really happened for many decades, but we saw an acceleration in appreciation over the last few years, probably since COVID and on, is the fact that unlike other cycles, economic cycles, we did not overbuild in the last economic cycles. So typically you have these situations where the market is balanced between supply and demand. And I don't want to talk in general terms, but yes, market is balanced. Money is getting cheap. Developers, builders, they want to make profit. They want to create product, and they do. And often because they're working in silos, so whatever one developer is doing is almost completely independent of what another developer is doing. They don't work together because there's so many of them. They tend to overbuild. And, this overbuilding happened over time. It accumulates up to a level that, okay, now we have too much supply, and then the market goes back. This did not happen this time. So if you're really looking back into the last time that the market was overbuilt, that was the year 2007, right before the crash. And at that time, the US market was built from a residential perspective about 3 million units, okay? And we know what happened later. Basically, market collapsed almost across the board. Housing prices went down, I think on average, from top to bottom, nearly 50%, and in some areas greater than that. And then the market stopped. So developers, a lot of them went belly up, bankrupt. A lot of people, even if they could develop, were too afraid to develop. And there's no reason to develop because the market was oversupplied. And they basically stopped developing for some time. And by not developing, and at the same time, you do have population growth. Either it is because of natural population growth, migration. You're eating into that supply over time. The US ate into that supply and became balanced again around the year 2011, 2012.
So I'm going to ask some of these, I'm going to call it the simple questions. I'm going to dumb down question. If we were in 2008, and I remember it distinctively, and there was images and pictures of houses across, I just remember Arizona, Vegas. I remember Vegas, like streets and streets of new build homes, and they just couldn't give them away, and they were just empty, and no one was living in them, and they were being owned by like a landscape gardener owned like 4 or 5 houses. There were 3 million homes. There was an overbuilt supply. There was more homes than we needed. Mm-hmm. And so those houses were empty. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
How do we...
3 million is a big number. 3 million, if you think about the overall stock of housing in the United States, right now it's about 128 million homes. Back then, probably something around 115 million homes. When you have an excess of 3 million, that is a very big number. And like you said, somebody... I like to say that one of the biggest indicators of why we're in a housing bubble is when you fly into Vegas, for example, you get in a taxi and your taxi driver is talking about how they are now investing in real estate. Be aware.
So people buying stuff, it was really people buying things they can't afford. So how do we go from an excess of 3 million homes in 2008 to only 3 years later, the absorption of that? Where do those buyers come from? Because understanding where the buyers came from, I think, is part of that story, the breaking down the simplicities of real estate. How did that absorb?
So it took about 5 years, from 2007 until 2012.
Okay.
And the math is relatively simple. So in the United States of America, we need roughly 1.6 million houses per year, or housing unit per year, in order to support population growth and to support housing that become obsolete, basically housing that need to be demolished and are not in living condition anymore. Let's make it simple. If you're building only 500,000 homes and there is need for 1.6 million homes, that means your shortage for that year of roughly 1 million or maybe 1.1 million in a year. That means that you can wipe out this oversupply of homes of 3 million in about 3 years. Now, it's a little bit more complex than that because, where those houses are located is important. So it's different if you have oversupply of iPads, okay? Yeah. It doesn't matter where they're located. You can ship them to wherever you need them. If you have oversupply in Las Vegas and you really need them in Miami, then it takes a little bit longer. So that's why it didn't take 3 years. It took about 5 years for the market to stabilize, because it's not that the number of units is where you need those units. But yes, the market stabilized around 2012. And guess what? Around that time, still, we underbuilt. Underbuilt not as severely. People start building, but instead of building 1.6 million units, we build about 1.1, 1.2. So you're in a shortage of about 400,000 units or so on average, roughly every year. Some years more than others. And that was all the way from 2012 until basically last year. So continuously for over 10 years after we were balanced, we're still underbuilding. And guess what? You find yourself 2023 with a shortage of 4 million units, shortage, not surplus. About 200,000 of those units are located here located or not located because of the shortage, here in the Tri-County of basically Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. And right now we're balanced. I think last year we overbuilt by a small amount, but that's a drop in the bucket compared to the shortage we have. It's going to take us a very long time to get out of these shortage of 4 million units.
So there was chatter before the election. There was a lot of narrative about, hey, and again, there was that typical bubbles and all these conversations that were going on. And it always revolves around the supply demand of product. This is the fundamentals. Going into the point that you said, that just to reiterate, there was an oversupply of 3 million around 2008. It created balance by 2012. After that, the need for new product was around 1.2 million every year, but we've only had around 500,000 being built. So we've been basically compounding the lack of homes over the last 12 years since 2012.
Yeah.
So today we have a shortage of 4 million across the US.
Yeah.
And I know people are wondering, okay, well, I'm in Miami, so how does this relate to me? What's our shortage in Miami-Dade and Broward?
It's hard to tell exactly the shortage here in Miami-Dade. Across the 3 counties, like I said, the shortage is roughly 200,000, and different estimates because it's very hard to see where people live. Some people work here in Miami-Dade but live in Broward or the other way around. It's probably about a third of that, give or take 10,000 units, so probably between 60 and 80,000 units are short here in Miami. But again, it's very important to understand which units are missing here. So we know, and people that talk about oversupply and overbuilding, and we are doing too much and maybe creating too many houses. I think they're talking about a specific segment of the housing market, which is the ultra luxury. So we know that Miami has been a capital magnet rather than a capital creator for a very long time, and that even more so accelerated in the last few years. And what I mean by that is that for many, many years, people didn't necessarily make their money in Miami. They just brought money to Miami. So whether it is, they brought it from, Latin America,
Europe, Latin America.
Yes, but Latin America was the main one. But basically people that had money in other places, for example, if you live in, and I don't want to pick up a country, but if you have a lot of money in Brazil, you want to bring it here because in Brazil, maybe it's not safe for you to drive your Lamborghini. You're going to maybe get dropped at the first traffic light you stop at. And you come and you spend your money here. And a lot of people just basically made Miami into their second home. And then during the pandemic, we saw that this migration of capital is not just a Latin America story. It became also a Northeastern story. So people from New York, Boston, New Jersey, etc., brought the money here. So, and now it is changing into a city where not only you bring your money here, you're also making the money here, because a lot of the people that brought their money here created an industry around them. And that is very important. So now you have the ability to also create your own wealth here, and people still choose to bring their wealth here. So what happened from the housing perspective is that we created a lot of ultra luxury units, and you know that very well, David, because you're transacting a lot of those properties. And I think it depends on which project you look at. Probably a little too many over a short period of time. So it doesn't mean that we're going to have, too many of them forever. But I think in the short term, there's probably a little bit too much product on the high end, especially the one that claim to be ultra luxury, and really it is. And I think we talked about last time. It's really just ultra expensive. It's not necessarily ultra luxury.
It's just clever branding. I wanted to take a step back. The population, as you said, the growth and the need for real estate of more properties. Going back to that first point about we needed, we were running short of 700,000 generally per year. I think we were giving me 1.2, and then we need. But it
depends. It was gradual, different numbers every year, but roughly
the need for those homes. Where does that simplistically come from? Are we talking? Let's talk about population growth, and then let's go into population replacement, because we've talked about those in the past, and I've kind of glossed over it, assumed that everybody knows. But I think breaking down population growth and where that is coming from, whether that's coming from I don't think more babies are being born. I don't think we're in a kind of an economy where we've got a pyramid where there's suddenly lots more kids. We can talk about a slower death rate and also the migration of people coming into the US.
Okay, so there's a few things that play into that. So the first one is if you're talking about birth rate versus death rate, and that is roughly balanced in the United States.
It is.
So there's other countries around the world like Japan, Europe. Those are classic examples where actually there is less kids being born compared to their parents that are die. Think about it roughly. You need to have 2 kids in order to replace their parents, and many families choose to not have kids or to have 1 children. That is not enough for a replacement rate. But the problem in those countries is that you also don't have migration. So United States of America, we have roughly balance between birth rate and death rate, but we do have migration because a lot of people that do want to live here, so they come here, and that's where the growth is coming. We still have some surplus, some excess of new kids being born relative to parents, but it's relatively small. But then when you ask where's the growth coming from, so number one, there's a lot of housing that become obsolete. So people think about housing as a product that stays forever. It doesn't. There's a lot of housing projects that after 50, 60, 80, 100 years, they just need to be demolished. It doesn't make sense to rehabilitate them. So that's number one. Then you have to think about, people say that there's a shortage of housing. So where are those people? Are they in the streets? So the 4 million people on the street? And the answer is no. Yes, we do have a, homelessness problem in the United States, but that is for different reasons. That is not because there's no housing. Usually it's around mental health. Yeah. Those people typically are the people that living longer with their parents. And if you look at the numbers, it used to be historically about people in their late 20s, early 30s. About 12% of them live with the parents. Now we're looking at about 16, 17%. So that's a very big number. And people that live longer with a roommate. Again, talking about, younger adults, 25, 30, 35 years old. More and more of them live with roommates where, under normal conditions, they would go and live by themselves. So those
is that because of choice, or is that financially
That is financially
motivated?
So financially motivated. I think that a lot of those people would want to go move in by themselves. They just don't because it's too expensive. And that is the affordability issue that is really weighing on the housing market. So on one hand, you have shortage. On the other hand, you have housing become very unaffordable for many people. So that is kind of the tug war between those two, is keeping the housing market balanced in terms of pricing. Because if you look at last year, the number of transactions, the housing market was the lowest in over a decade. We transacted very few housing. And typically when you see few transactions, you see prices drop. This time it was very different. Transaction amount, so the number of people that bought and sold, either is commercial.
Volume.
Yes. Yeah. It came down drastically over the last, since 2022 and this year, I guess.
And we're talking US-wide here.
US-wide, yes, US-wide. That's including Florida. It's true here. Talking to a lot of brokers that doing many transactions, they will tell you transaction volume. I look at the numbers all the time. They went down significantly, depends what area you look at, but significantly. At the same time, housing prices stay stable, actually went up. And that is because you have this, when houses go down just a little bit and when there's a few deals and some market condition took advantage of, these people are that need a housing. They just live with their parents because, it's the best choice they have right now. They're jumping back in the market and buying a home.
Is that going to build up? And again, I'm just helping people appreciate if they were to go out and poll within the states and understand the profile of the buyers and the potential buyers who are backlogging. If I'm hearing you right, just joining the dots, there is an accruing number of young professionals who are gone from 12 to 16%, living with their parents, not out of choice, out of necessity. Yeah. And there's going to be a threshold point where they're going to move out and they're going to want to buy homes. And affordability of homes has to do with two things, several things, which we can expand on. The price of the property and the ability to buy that, and that gets into interest rates.
Yeah. So basically what we describe is what we call pent-up demand. So there is demand for housing. They just sit on the sideline. They don't do anything because they can wait for a little bit, but they cannot wait forever. And as this demand accumulates, so, we don't build too many houses right now. Interest rates are high. Construction costs are high. So it's not like we're going to be building many more houses than we need. So that shortage is here to stay for some time. And the people that should be living in their own home but don't, they cannot wait forever. Eventually they're, as they see their renewals coming and your rent it used to be $3,000, now it's $3,200 or whatever it is. That is every time that they start to think about, should I buy a home now? And eventually they are moving and buying a home. And by the way, even if they don't buy a home, being a renter, they're still using one unit of housing. The question is that, are they using the same unit as their parents, or they're using a unit by themselves? So it's really, for the sake of supply, it's irrelevant whether they buy a home or rent by themselves. But they will move eventually to owning or renting their own unit.
You raised, and again, this is joining the dots here, you raised a really good point. When we were having the React conference, you showed on screen, which really grabbed me. You said, and again, correct me if I'm getting this right or wrong, but like 100 years ago, the average number of people living in a home, which is around 800 square feet, was 6.5 people.
You got it a little bit off.
Please correct me. Give me the right number, because it was
about 200 years ago.
200, I'm sorry.
But the average was 6 people for an 800 square foot home. And then gradually what happened is you have less and less people living in a home, and the housing become larger. Where the situation now is instead of 6, you're looking at 2.5 people per home, maybe 2.8, and the average square foot of a new home is 2,500 square feet. So the house is 3 times larger. The family size is less than half. You multiply one by the other, you're basically getting a ratio of 6 or 7. Basically, 7 times more housing for the same population. And that is because our standard of living changed over time. So this is something that also people do not understand. It's not just, yes, you can go and everybody live in their, 6 people in 800 square foot. So 150 or 120 square foot per person. You can go back there, but we're not going backward. We're going forward.
Yeah.
It is true that in some large cities where it's very dense, and you see that sometimes in Miami, people actually choose to go with those micro units because of their affordability. But generally speaking, this is not the trend.
Yeah, the trend, and this is me adding in my experience on the ground, because this awareness, this studies that you've done, I'm going to bring this back into me on the ground selling real estate. This is what I observe. The desire for bigger property has increased. Once COVID happened, especially we saw it in Miami, people are craving more space. Miami feels very different to New York. We would produce a lot of 600-700 square foot units, small, you call them studios, micro lofts. I always remember that humorous term that somebody would come up with. But now I'm seeing the condos are getting bigger, the homes are getting bigger. And if you go down the street, for example, in Pinecrest, Palmetto Bay, Coral Gables, I live in a neighborhood called Ponce Davis down the street. And what I've observed is I see a lot of houses around that have now been sold, and they were 2,200 square feet, 2,400 square feet, considered big at the time, 4 bedrooms.
And they're rebuilding something that is 7,000 or 8,000 square feet.
They've been leveled, and all the new homes, Every new home builder is not building less than 5,000 square feet adjusted. I'm going to generalize a little bit, but what it feels like is if buyers come to me and say, I want a brand new house at 3,000 square feet, you're not going to find it because the builders will max out the square footage on those lots. And that's why those old homes are getting replaced by these bigger homes, and you need bigger lots to build bigger homes. That's the zoning laws. And land is the one thing they're not building any more of, as the saying goes.
And that's very important to build on that. So first of all, yes, I love that what you see is replacements of home. So people think about, okay, so there's those new homes being constructed. They're really the only thing that is being constructed, if you talk about Miami-Dade, in large quantities, it's condos.
Yes.
You can theoretically build unlimited amount of them, right? I mean, you have a empty lot, you can build 400 units, or you have a lot where there is an old office building or 100 units or 20 units. Now, according to new zoning laws, you can build a lot more. So you can build a lot more, units if you talk about condos. But when you talk about anything that is attached to ground or attached to land, talking about single-family homes and even townhouses, you cannot build many of those at all. Most of the townhouses, I mean, if you look around in an area here, South Miami, Coconut Grove, for example, when you see, okay, there's so many townhomes being built. So first of all, how much is so many? We're really talking about dozens. We're not talking about hundreds or thousands.
I think Coral Gables this year, we had, when I did my last podcast, I think it was towards Q3, I'd only seen 4 sales of brand new homes in Coral Gables because it's 3.5 years to do a house. You've got a year of planning and permitting, and then you've got 2 years of construction.
I'm going through that process right now. Yes.
Yeah, so
I know how it works. So
you feel the pain.
Yeah. So, but at the end of the day, even when you have this new home, it's really not a new unit. It's a new unit, but it's not an additional unit. It's a replacement of an older unit. So replacing an older unit with a new unit, maybe it's a little larger, but really did not produce more units. Almost the only place in Miami-Dade where you can build volume of new units is Homestead area. That is one of those up and coming areas in Miami-Dade where there's really economy around those housing. They're selling for a fraction of what you can get a unit in, whether it is Coconut Grove, Coral Gables, South Miami, etc. And there's a reason to be there. At the end of the day, if you want to be in South Florida and you cannot afford, because most people cannot afford living in, again, the areas we just mentioned, then that is where you can get value. And over time, you're going to get some conversion. So, for example, if the ratio between a similar unit between Coconut Grove and Homestead right now is, let's say, 4-1, I think Coconut Grove is always going to be more expensive, but it's not going to be 4-1.
Yeah.
It's maybe over time, it's going to be a 2.5-1 or something like that. So you probably get in some of those areas more growth. And generally speaking, if you're talking about if I were to choose between investing in a condo or buying a condo for myself or buying anything that's your land, you may not like my answer, but it will be buying single-family home, townhouses. You're probably going to get a lot more appreciation there over the next 2 decades.
So let's get into that fundamentals. You play one side and I'll play the other.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, this is the healthy conversation that we've got to have. And everyone's going to have opinion, and people are going to DM after this, and they're going to make comments below and say, well, I think this and I think that. So let's go through the forces at play, because I think this is really helpful. And people do ask me all the time, what's a better investment, a home or a condo? We've touched on, to start with, just to keep this all framed together nicely, we've started on the population growth, which has occurred through migration. It's occurred because, we've got not necessarily more people, but we've got the needs of those people wanting more space and also old product being replaced with new product. The need for product has gone up. So demand there. Now there's desire. Now let's talk about capacity and capability to actually execute and buy the product. And this is where I guess the economic conversation starts to come in, where people say, well, I think there's going to be some kind of, correction in the market because people can't afford to buy these properties. There may be some desire. Ultimately, affordability is one thing that gets into the equation. So I'm just going to add this into the framework because homes versus condos, price points do matter. I think we've seen a large migration of people buying condos now because houses, and again, I am a luxury broker, so this is kind of more segregated into that area. The luxury homes are that much more expensive than they ever used to be relative to their counterparts in the condo market.
So first of all, I agree with you. So the affordability is a huge issue, but let's take a slightly longer term view and understand why I believe housing, single-family homes, duplexes, etc., will outperform. If you think about the supply, the really only product that can supply more to the market is condos. Okay. You cannot really supply a lot more housing. So basically, you are stuck at a certain level of existing inventory for single-family home, maybe a little bit higher, but not much. And the amount of condos can increase over time. So in relative terms, housing will become more and more rare. When I say housing, I say single-family home will become more and more
availability
rare in relative terms. And therefore, as we know, anything that is more rare, if there is demand for it, should go up in value more than the
and you use the word demand. This is where I'm going to hook in demand. Now, the question is the demand for that product compared to the condo product. And I might argue.
Let me say something before the demand, because I think on the demand you may have a valid argument, but there's another important distinction between the two is the fact that when you buy a condo, you do not really have control over your product. At the end of the day, you're controlling the inside of the unit, but if the building is poorly managed, or funds are being mismanaged or spent in a way that wouldn't be the way that you would spend it, you basically, you don't have much to do about it. So the fact that you don't have control over your own investment is a huge problem for owners. So if I'm building my own home or I live in my own home and I think that I need to paint the outside every 10 years, then I do it every 10 years. But if I live in a condo and the association believe that they need to be done every 8 years, then they do it every 8 years, and maybe I lost 2 years of accumulating funds in order to do the same task. The same thing about choices for how you price your insurance and what kind of deductibility you take, what amenities you have, how you maintain them. If you really look at condos, no matter how fancy they are, look at them 20 years later, they're not that fancy anymore. So they take the ultra most luxury building, look at it 20 years later, it just looks a little bit dated. If you look at a ultra luxury home that's been well maintained, 20 years, a house from the year early 2000s, it is not dated. Or it can get a very relatively easy facelift, but maybe updating tiles, kitchen, bathrooms, relatively inexpensive if you compare to the value of the home. And it can look basically brand new again. You cannot do that with a condo because you choose to. You can do it if everybody chooses to, but then you have, again, 300, 400 residents that each one have different views, different needs, different funding, etc. So you're losing the control. That is a problem. That is on the ultra luxury. On the cheaper, older units, we know that we have the whole issue of the 40-year recertification after the Surfside collapse, and that is putting a lot of pressure on higher reserves, higher assessments, higher HOAs, where a lot of people that are basically on limited income cannot afford to handle. So that is a problem on the high end and the low end of condos, and I think it will take some time to play out until you'll see value there again. I think you will see some value in condos in the next couple of years that people can take advantage of.
Yeah, I've always found that within each cycle, there's moments when condos win and there's moments when homes win. And I'm seeing right now, this is a very price-specific, product-specific conversation. If you have a conversation about the older buildings, then of course they're going to lose. Because they're going to lose regardless, because at the end of the day, they're going to need to come down. That's like the very old home that sits in the flood zone that doesn't have hurricane doors and windows, that's a small house. It's just, or a house that's not fit for purpose. I think the recognition here is what used to be, I remember on legal terms, the term fit for purpose. What is it that people want it for? And the appetite that I see right now is that in a perfect world, yes, owners would love to have and again, I'm talking about, let's talk about that luxury sector. They'd love to have a beautiful house directly on the water with a great water view. And over 20 years, even though it's going to look a little bit older in 20 years, it's still going to be an amazing house. Yes. However,
they cannot afford it.
Exactly. The access to that price point is prohibitive, because if I take you to a waterfront house my favorite neighborhood is Gables Estates, a new waterfront house in Gables Estates, the ones that are being built right now by Cesar Molina, who does a fantastic job on building homes. The starting price for those is about $40 million. That is whopping. And you mentioned about...
Sorry, David, but here's the way it works. When you have a product that's become more rare, and I think we already made the argument there, we know that wealth is being created exponentially. So the people that can have access to those, that can afford a 7 million or 9 million or 12 million or 15 million, their wealth is growing exponentially. And we really talk about the very wealthy people that are coming to Miami and choosing to live in that property that you describe. For many of them, whether the property is selling for 40 million or 30 or 80, almost doesn't make a difference. Because if somebody is a billionaire, and there's a lot of billionaires coming here, and you're really talking about very few of those properties like you described, the difference in between 30 million and 50 million is meaningless almost. Now, even if you go to the level below, so those are not billionaires, but people that we call them ultra wealthy. It used to be defined as people with net worth of 30 million or more. It's still definition, even though probably the number is maybe double that. Think about people with a net worth of 60 or 70 million dollars. Again, their net worth is growing exponentially. It's not growing linearly. In other words, they don't earning their money and adding to it, a few $1,000s.
No, they're not. They're
month.
not living off their income. They're living off their investments, which are compounding.
And that investment is growing exponentially. So their ability to pay for that product is not by an X amount of dollars more every year, is by X number of percentages. And as the product become more rare, and as you see more people making Miami really a place of choice, I mean, Jeff Bezos chooses to live here. He can live wherever he wants. Yeah. Messi can live anywhere he wants. He chooses to be here. There's so many of those examples. People think that it's this is not an Amazon story. This is not a soccer story. This is a Miami story. The fact that people that can live anywhere they want choose to be here. They're not coming alone. They're coming with the entourage. They're earning the money and investing the money, and the growth of their wealth is becoming exponential. And that is the people that be fighting for these products. And then the tier below them, the people that work for them, around them, the right-hand people, etc., also, again, being rewarded very well for their performance, etc., becoming high earners. So they don't just bring capital here, they're also earning money here. They're the one that maybe buy the less exciting property, but still the want for something that with no neighbors, as people have families, as they have need for privacy, is there. And when you don't have more of that product, it will just increase.
It's a demand. It's the classic thing of the supply of that product. I hear what you're saying. The supply of that product is limited. And I agree that if you are going to live here all year round and this is going to be your primary home, long term, a home is going to make a better investment. But sometimes it's just not functionally suitable for your lifestyle. So I'm going to say, I respect that. I live in a house myself. You're building a house, so I can agree that there is, if you blend out averages and if it's all about just making money, then long-term house can be great. With that said, there's been a real shift in behavior. And I'm not saying that it's the be-all and end-all, but it's an observation that I've noticed, that we have a very large growing population of people migrating into Miami who still have properties in other locations. They've got a level of wealth, and I know lots of people right now who their kids are grown up. They don't need their house anymore or want the house anymore. And I think probably want more than anything. They don't want to have a home anymore. And I'm seeing for the first time a migration into these ultra luxury condos because it suits their lifestyle better. Looking after a home, when you have I always would say, and I would agree with you, I would always say a house is cheaper to run than a home. However, once you've got a really big home, I always joke with my wife that I feel I have a special assessment every month, the gardener, the landscaper, the kumaru needs painting, the sprinkler heads get cut, lights need fixing, trees need trimming. There's a lot to be done. And some of these houses that live on, they're kind of compounds. They're multiple acres, 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 square foot homes. These need a lot of staff. They need a lot of maintenance. It's like having your own hotel. And I'm now seeing people migrate to some exemplary ultra luxury product, which I'm seeing hard to replicate by virtue of geography. And there are some points in the city. I would always count point lots. So a point lot or a peninsula front lot is obviously that sits right on a tip or sits on the coastline. And if you count from, let's say, Coconut Grove going all the way down through to Pinecrest, and you look at all the houses on the peninsula, there's about 42. It's very few. And so you can see those keep going up in value. And I did a story with one of my team talking about a condo back in 2017 that they could have bought at Regalia for 40 million, or Porsche Tower, I think it was. There was at 40 million that ended up selling for 25, 4 or 5 years later. And if they'd actually gone out and bought a home in Gables Estates, which at that year was available for 25, that house now, you couldn't buy that for 100. Because it's just 2 acres right on the point.
I think you'll see more of those stories.
Which I expect to see. But there's also what I think, I don't want to totally dismiss investment opportunity for ultra luxury condos when it's really the right condo. And what do I define by that? Buildings on the point. So if you look at Continuum south of 5th, still extremely well. The new Mandarin that they're building on Brickell Quay, it's going to do extremely well. Park Grove in Coconut Grove, interestingly enough, that product just keeps going up. And I think a lot of it has to do with zoning. One of the big things that we have in Miami, and you see it with houses, is that houses, you don't see them subdividing lots anymore, or it's much, much harder to do. At the same time, I'm seeing lots for condos. They're getting much more expensive. You buy a lot right now. I think the reason Mandarin's building at the price it's building at is because they've owned that lot since 1976, so they can. But the entry level into construction, the cost of construction, we had Patrick Murphy on here 2 weeks ago. The level that they have to build to now with condos at that level, it's that much more expensive. It's taking that much longer because it has to be that much resistant to nature. I mean, the moving forces, the piles, the fact that we're on limestone, changing environment, climate change, all this stuff. They're having to spend a lot more money having to do this product. And there is in points, kind of like Manhattan, it's becoming almost that Manhattan conversation. If you were able to buy 220 Central Park West, what's it going to cost you today as the most expensive dollar per square foot in New York City? It's $1,300, $1,500 a square foot, something like that. And 20 years ago, it was nowhere near that. Yeah. So,
David, there's no question. The right product always will do well, and that's why you need to understand what the right product. That's why you either hire somebody like yourself or like myself, to help you guide through the process. So you really choose the right product. I think we agree on this, but I think on average, so really when you're looking on average on condominiums in general, without talking about specific, curated projects, when you compare them to single family, there's a very strong argument to make why the single family will continue and outperform for some time.
Well, it is that classic song, is land is the one thing. There's a song called Buy Dirt. I don't know if you heard that's a country song, or that saying land is the one thing they're not building any more of. Land is a commodity, and I guess this maybe underpins the whole conversation of real estate, which is the availability of land and the demand for land that we have with the population migration, and the wealth that goes with it. Let's talk about wealth movement, wealth growth. We just had the election. The markets, whether you were, whichever party you believed in, regardless, the markets made a very strong run over the last month since the election results. What would you attest this to? And I'm not putting you on a spot to talk about politics, but what would you attest such a strong run in the market and such a change in psychology?
I think the main thing is basically people were waiting for the election to be behind them. And it doesn't really matter whether, they're party of choice won or lost the election. It's the fact that it's behind us. And once it's behind us, now they say like, okay, we're happy or we're unhappy. Let's get unfrozen again and move. And that's why probably your phone is ringing a little bit more in the last few weeks than it has before.
a lot more.
Yes,
it really.
I know.
Up.
I'm talking to again. I'm on the ground. I'm speaking to a lot of people.
You had it
yourself,
too,
and I feel the same thing. So yes, things are moving probably a little bit faster. People start looking again, and again, it's all this pent up demand that there have to be a breaking point. And a breaking point can be a small one, like, okay, now the election is behind us, or it can be maybe a relief in pricing. Relief in pricing doesn't necessarily mean that prices go down. It means that maybe you have prices that are stable for a year. At the same time, income maybe go up by 3, 4, 5%. That's, give you a discount already relative to income by a few percentages. And at the same time, borrowing rates go from 7% to maybe 5.5%. That give you another discount. That create, again, increase demand by people that, before that they sat on the sidelines and now they are moving. So I think the first one is basically people just, they're tired of waiting. I mean, they use the election as an excuse to wait, and now it's behind them. They can't use the excuse anymore, so they're moving. I think that's the main thing. There's really nothing really happened since, November or early November. Just psychology.
What do you see when we get into the financial engines of these states? And let's work with Miami-Dade, South Florida, the financial engines that grow the city, and again that generate wealth, because obviously people need money to buy real estate. So what are the things that everyone should be paying attention to as a real estate professor teaching this to break it down so people can understand and never get away from those fundamentals? What are the fundamentals that we need to be talking about and paying attention to that are driving the wealth generation?
I think for a very long time, Miami used to be the place to come and vacation. So people came here, so hospitality basically was the industry. And some people have a second home here because it was cheap to do so. It became a lot less of that. So now when you hear a lot of financial firms that are moving to the area and technology firms that are moving to the area, anywhere from Microsoft to Adobe to you name it, the big names are just moving and leasing more and more offices. Again, these are offices being leased. That means high salaries for the employees. That means that those employees are coming with their families. They're bringing other companies around them, because when Microsoft is moving here, okay, so they start with a small space, but so of course they bring their employees, and then other companies that depend on Microsoft come too. So it's a domino effect, and you start seeing it financially in the finance industry and the technology industry, and that's something we haven't seen in large scale almost ever. It was really until probably it's really accelerated in the last 5 years or so, and that is a huge effect on the market in terms of how much people are actually getting paid here. It really used to be that we're getting paid very little.
So should we pay attention to commercial leasing rates and what leases cost, or what buildings are being built, and
of course,
square footage being built for
if you're
commercial
noticing, so office in general, we know that if you look at data nationally, office is in trouble. So the whole story about people working from home or partially from home, companies don't need as much space, etc. We know the story. So generally speaking, office is suffering in the US. But if you're looking here in Miami-Dade, you cannot get A-class office for rent. It's not available. Everything is taken, and if you find something that is available, it's extremely, extremely expensive. Even the B-class is very high occupancy. Only when you go into the very low-class offices, that's where you see some softness. But basically, the A-class and the B-class, those are the firms that we're talking about. Those are the new money that is coming from the corporate side that occupy those spaces, and that's what, again, driving housing prices around it.
So to be clear, so those who know, and again, kind of going back to the basics and stating the obvious a little bit, the Class A office space is the offices taken up by the major household names, high-level finance, Citadel, Lloyd's, Santander, Apple, Microsoft, take your pick.
Mm-hmm.
That's Class A office, basically the nicest office space you could possibly get hold of.
Yes. And when this space is being occupied, it means you're occupying it with high-paying or high-paid individuals that then, again, come here with the family. Typically, they're coming from somewhere else. Those jobs many times are not necessarily being created. They're being moved from somewhere else. And then you have more creation around them. And again, these are the people that are going to be demanding homes.
So more office, and again, I know in Miami there was a statistic, it was around 6 million square feet of Class A office under construction right now. So millions of square feet of Class A office that's new, that we hadn't seen before, means many thousands of high-earning employees that we hadn't otherwise seen before. So that new population coming in, having, and I say, commercially housing them, having somewhere for them to work, where the businesses will then generate money, and the businesses that generate money will then pay them, and then they will take those salaries and they will go around, go home, and they'll say, oh, we don't want to rent, we want to buy something, we want to own something because this is now our home. So more Class A office at a high level means more people who make more money, who can buy more houses.
Yes. And a lot of really what happened here is not so much the population growth, because Miami is not growing as fast as Miami-Dade is not growing as fast as, for example, Broward or Palm Beach, but it's really replacement of some of those people. So basically, some people that unfortunately do not make enough money, they're being pushed away, and being pushed away that either south or west or north, and then they're being replaced by somebody who's making, more money. Either they have more wealth or they have a better paying jobs. And that is what you see it's not just here. This is what happened if you look through history in any city that is exploding, that basically, maybe it was hosting a population that was not doing well financially, and it's being replaced by people that are buying their houses, in many cases renovating or knocking it down altogether and building something new. So I love that it's replacement of population. And you see that a lot. I mean, we're talking about Citadel for a while. It seemed like an old story, but they're still not here. I mean, their project is still being, this is a process. And Citadel, again, it's not just they're coming by themselves. When they come and as they come, they attract not just the employees themselves, but companies around them to do the same thing.
I would like those watching the show to really think about this for a second and really contemplate. And again, those I know a lot of realtors follow the show, and thank you for those who have come up to me and said, oh, this podcast has really helped me understand the real estate industry better and help me understand how to explain it to my clients when they're coming into town. The population replacement, if you are taking, and again, very simply, 1,000 people who were making $100,000, and you move those 1,000 people out, and you replace them with 1,000 people who are making $1 million, 10 times what the first group made, suffice it to say that second group will want a more expensive habitat, either renting or owning, in that area within proximity to their office. And that is why we've seen, ironically, a statistic, Coral Gables salaries, or not salaries, household incomes. The household income in Coral Gables, I think over a 2-year period, went up 78%. Now
and it's not because those people make 78%
They didn't get a pay
more.
rise.
It's because maybe they get some pay raise, but a big part of that is the replacement.
Yeah.
And that is actually take us to the other side, because people say, okay, so you're just moving those people away. I mean, at the end of the day, we do need the service industry, which is typically the industry where you do not make very high salaries, with some exceptions, of course. And that's why affordable housing is also so important. That's why areas, we talked before about Homestead, but not even Homestead. When you're talking about, the center of the cities and the incentive that Miami is creating for bonuses for development, if you were to rent that or sell that for a certain price, that is extremely important, because at the end of the day, yes, you want to replace some of the population, because some population that maybe is not productive and essential for the city should be naturally replaced. That is the nature of capitalism, with population that is essential for the city. Because for somebody, if it doesn't matter for them whether they live in Miami-Dade or in Broward, then guess what? They should be living in Broward. But for those people that it's essential for them to live in Miami-Dade, right next to the financial district, because they work there, because they produce.
Yeah.
Those are the ones going to be the higher bidders, and they're going to be living there. But at the same time, creating affordable housing that support these people is extremely important, because when those people go to a restaurant, they need somebody to, work at that restaurant, serve, cook, clean, etc. The same thing happened. If you're talking about just support around the office, or any of those high-paying jobs being supported by a few lower-paying jobs, and those lower-paying jobs need to have a place to live. So as we are talking about replacement population, which is inevitable, when you live in a place that is more attractive, it becomes more expensive. And I always joke telling people, if you don't like, too much traffic and pricing of anything goes up a lot, well, try to live in a place where traffic is going down and price going down. Believe me, you do not want to live in that place. That means that nobody want to be there.
That's the worst. That's a much worse scenario. With that, working sector of people who need to serve, obviously, and aren't making the same kind of money. The growth, what is, and again, Eli, you're on the ground here, and you know a lot of businesses, a lot of business owners, a lot of people in the commercial, industrial, the office, and obviously the residential sector. Are you seeing the need and the growth, and do you have any statistics on the need for the multifamily and the affordable housing for the workforce? Do we have any information on that so we can understand what that might look like?
I'm not sure I can give you actual numbers of what is the need in terms of units, but we know that, every day when you talk to just common people, and they will tell you, well, we're considering moving out of Miami, and the first thing that the reasoning is that it became too expensive. Now, in most cases, by the way, when you think about somebody who's thinking about moving outside of Miami because it's too expensive, those are renters. Those are not owners. Basically, if you own a home, you lock the cost of your housing, which is the biggest expense line on your budget. And then even if housing become more expensive, well, it doesn't hurt you because you already locked the price of your home. Maybe insurance go up a little bit, property taxes, etc. But the main component, which is housing, stay the same. And typically, you're not going to be moving out because of cost. The people that are moving out, those that are renting. And a lot of people talk about the risk, or what happens if I buy a home and then housing price go down? Possible. And I'm telling them that really the risk for most people in a hot city like Miami is the opposite. What happens if you don't buy a home and housing basically are running away from you in terms of prices? And we saw that just happen recently. Many people maybe stayed on the sidelines. They didn't buy a home 3-4 years ago because it was just a little bit too expensive for them. And now it's a lot more expensive for them. They cannot touch it. Those are the people that are moving away.
I see that.
So the risk of not doing something, and in this case, buying a home in a city like Miami is a lot greater than the risk of buying, and maybe the price will go down.
So let's look this, and this really segues nicely into this final piece, which is where we're heading in 2025, because now we've understood the fundamentals. Hopefully this first 45 minutes of the conversation has allowed us to frame the demand and the supply sides of it. And obviously, the appetite of population growth, the increase of population replacement, so the value, the ability to buy, and the financial capacity for the population to buy more expensive real estate, or better real estate, or real estate that rather than renting to buy. Now let's move forward into 2025. What are the forces at play? How do you see it moving? Because one of the things you touched on, and I want you to expand on, is that point of, if you just keep renting and you don't buy, the market's going to get further away from you. Is that true across both what you think the condo and the housing sector? Or is there any side that you say, you know what, this may not be true over here?
I think it is mostly true, like I said before, probably on the housing side, right, on the condos. I think on the condos, you probably will find opportunities on the affordable side for a few years. But generally speaking, 2025, I think, is a year where you're going to see a rebound in the number of transactions, simply because all this pent-up demand. Mortgage rates are not as high as they used to be. They're probably going to come down a bit more. That will encourage some people to actually sell, people that did not sell before. And prices probably will be stable. Again, some will do better than others, but relatively stable. And the reason that I'm not projecting a significant increase in housing prices is because prices of housing forget about, yes, we have this shortage, etc. They went up too fast over a short period of time. And I don't think that they're correcting significantly, but I think they're taking a pause. If you look at a recent survey, and again, I showed it in my presentation at the React conference, of when you ask the common people, do you think now it's a good time to buy a home?
Yes.
Right now.
It's $1 million question.
Yes.
Well, everybody wants to know,
it's not necessarily is it or is it not, but what they think. 88% of people, as the last survey, I think it was in October, 88% of people believe that it's not a good time to buy a home. That means that only 12% of people believe that it is a good time to buy a home. Now, when you compare this and you outlay it on housing affordability, you see that these numbers surged. So the people that think that it's not a good time to buy a home surge at the same time when housing become unaffordable. And the last time we saw similar statistics was the early 1980s. So the early 1980s was a similar percentage. I think it was 85% or so that people say that it's not a good time to buy a home. It was the last time that our housing was as unaffordable as they are today. And guess what? Even though everybody thought that it's not a good time to buy a home, it was one of the best times to buy homes because you're able to buy a home at a relatively low price, being able to refinance later at low mortgage rates, and the house appreciation that we saw over the 10 or 20 years after that were above normal. So yes, people, when they're afraid of doing something, they would say it's not a good thing to do. It's just human nature. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we do. But again, there's an end to that. At the end of the day, they need to live somewhere. They need to move away from the home. They need to move away from the roommate, all the things we talked about.
And you said an end to that because I think it's been 2024 as a year has been a year where I've seen a lot of people put their purchase on hold.
Yes.
But people can only put hold for a while. Mm-hmm. And it's been a year, and that obviously that's penting up demand. That's more people are coming in as those people are holding off. So we've got more individuals who have come to work into Miami. They're coming into the new offices. Maybe they just had a baby. How many babies are born in South Miami Baptist and, Mount Sinai Hospital this year? Many, many, many couples with new kids. They want to get a home in the market. So I don't see, it's kind of like holding the top down in the bottle, shaking it up, and then it's building up pressure. This is a year of building pressure. And I think we need to see some of that pressure get released in 2025.
And again, this 1 year, or I guess 2 years in 2022, when you saw people waiting. Okay, so what are they waiting for? They're waiting for significantly lower interest rate. They're not going to get it. Interest rate may come down a bit, but we see that interest rates are not coming down a lot. They're not going to see 3% mortgages.
No, not in this lifetime.
So they're going to realize that at some point it's like, okay, it is what it is. Interest rates are, normalizing and they're probably not going to go significantly lower. So that's number one. They're waiting for the election. Okay, the election is behind them. They're waiting for housing price to come down. They realize it's not going to happen, at least not widespread. Again, the whole supply, basically issue is going to hold housing prices. Because really, when you think about housing prices stay stable at the same time that mortgage rates went from 3 to 8, you understand how resilient the housing market is.
Yeah, very.
So when you see all these things, and then you come see your rent renewal, and you're just a little bit higher than it was the year before, and then you say to your spouse, well, maybe we should.
And rents in these primary markets aren't cheap. Just to be clear, I see rents anywhere for a decent home in Grove, Gables, Pinecrest, any market, anywhere between 50 to the sky is the limit. On a bunch of leases this year, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a month, which sounds like a lot, but to a lot of people, they've been doing it and then there's a lot of very wealthy people I've noticed who have been just trying to feel the lay of the land because they're not buying a $3 or $4 million home. They're buying a $30 or $40 million home, but they want to find the right one.
And those people are not long-term renters.
No.
At the end of the day, they can live in a beautiful home. They pay a significant amount of money, but they never really feel like it's their home. So there's a lot of arguments of why you should be renting. I do have a buy versus rent index. In many cases, it does make sense to rent. But I think for these type of people we talk about, it's very important at the end of the day to own.
Yeah.
Whether it's financially makes sense or not, simply because they don't feel at home unless they own
And
their
we'll
own
share
property.
that buy versus rent index. We'll try and we attach all of our podcasts with an article, with a blog, and we'll attach that so you can maybe start to measure it up. Because I know I've had many people come to me over the last few years and said, I'm going to rent and wait for the collection. And I'm like, let me know how that works out for you. And it always ends badly. And I always think to myself, what is wrong with these people's, they're clearly their understanding of economics is off. And I hope that this conversation gives people just some base awareness of how you measure the economics of real estate and what you need to pay attention to. I want to finalize with the one thing that we've always come back to. I feel that this year, 2024, has been the realization of the long Miami. It's the conversation that started at the beginning of the year. We've had continued, no matter it's been a slower market, there's still that awareness of migration of capital, building of commercial space, industrial, expansions, multifamily been desire for that's been through the roof, population replacement. There's this awareness of long Miami, and I've seen this manifest itself in one particular asset class more than anything else. New condo construction. The rate of buy-up of new condos construction this year has been unbelievable. We just started a project yesterday, which is a new project. By the time this airs, it'll be out there on the market. I'm one of the sales directors on the project. It's called The Well in Coconut Grove. Mm-hmm. And we started 20 reservations in one day. It's been nuts. I'm literally having to line people up out the door in order to kind of like hold them back.
For you.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride, and it will continue to be quite a ride. What's interesting is that this awareness of, and I've seen it with other sales across the board. We have a closing right now, this moment at 5 Park. I've got deals at Paragon, deals at Mandarin, deals up and down the coastline, Shell Bay, Rivage, you name the building, we've been dealing with it. And we have a website, New Condo Construction Miami. See below if you want to click on that and see everything about all the new construction condos in the whole of South Florida. We've covered all of them. The buy-up's been incredible. And the overwhelming conversation has been, I see where Miami's going in the next 4 years. I
think it's very important also when people talk about, long Miami, for example, one of the easiest thing to predict, because the future is very difficult to predict, but one of the easiest thing to predict, if you're really looking back at history, is migration.
Yes.
And, if you have a city that is hot, take Austin, Texas. It's not hot this year and then cold the next. It is hot for decades. If you're talking about Denver, it's not hot this year and cold the next year. It's hot for decades. So there's a reason why people move there. People make long-term plans to move themselves with the family. It's not about, I'm moving in today and let's see next month when we move back or not. Those are long-term decisions. Companies, even longer. When a company is making a choice to move into a particular city, they have a long-term plan. And usually it's not about, we're dipping our toes, and if things go okay, we're going to accelerate that. And it looks like they already dipped their toes. They're already liking it. They already like what they see, and they continue to move in. So this is really, I think, a multi-decade story. It doesn't mean that, again, we're going to see another growth in housing price like we saw in the last 5 years because housing price went up so fast in a short period of time. But I think really if you have a longer term view, you'll do just well.
Yeah, it solidifies. It is interesting to see. And again, there is a split media that we're dealing with right now. I'd love you to comment on this, because there's a lot of articles that have come out that have said, we had some storms this year. Oh, the New Yorkers and Californians are not liking South Florida. They're all moving back. Please expand as, an economist, a professor, somebody who teaches this. Expand on those comments, or don't even have to quantify them, but what's your opinion of the companies moving in, the people moving in? Are they moving back?
Well, first of all, there's, of course, some people that moved here for COVID are going back. But if you're really looking at those statements, they're not backed by data. If you're thinking about what happened here and those companies that are choosing to come here, they're not changing their mind halfway and moving back. So there's no data to support the fact that people are moving back, except for the fact that, yes, when you have such a huge migration happening during COVID, it is only natural that some of them are coming back. But
there's still more to replace them.
But
on top
yes,
of that. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, when you're talking to some multifamily owners, and I have a few friends that are owning 1,000 units here, they will tell you that some of their new projects are, 40% of the people that apply to be a renter in those projects, and, of course, they're getting their IDs, etc., they're coming from outside of Miami-Dade. And when they say outside of Miami-Dade, it doesn't mean they're coming from Broward, some, but mostly they're coming from New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, California, etc. And this is not stopping. Again, when one person is moving here, and it's and the other people, his friends, and I don't know, in New York are kind of okay. We've been thinking about it for a while, and eventually they pull the trigger. So yes, those are long-term decisions. It takes time for that migration to happen. It's accelerated during COVID. Some of that went back, but I don't think it's a reversal. It's not like they're going back and we're going to have a population reduction.
Yeah, and I will add to that the sales that I've had, and I've had dozens and dozens of new construction sales this year, and I speak to all the in-house sales team because Douglas Sullivan control so much of the new construction market. The overwhelming majority, and I want to make this very clear for those watching this, the overwhelming majority of buyers that we've seen have come from outside of South Florida. They've come from New York, Connecticut, California, DC, Chicago. They've come from outside of South Florida, outside of Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach. And that's the majority of those buyers, which means that those ultra luxury products, and they're buying these overwhelmingly as their primary residence, which tells me one thing very with great certainty. They're coming here with their businesses. They're coming here with their money. And they're coming here over the next 4 years as all these new buildings are getting built. And there's not enough, actually, of those. And that's another conversation altogether. But it's very clear to me that that wealth migration is going to continue. And that's always a very solid sign. Because, hey, if you have the money and you have the business and you have the desire and you have the entrepreneurship, which is a huge aspect, you have all the key elements that you need to see the city grow. And
you cannot replicate Miami, I think, anywhere else. I mean, the fact that the culture we have here, it's like no other place. I mean, the whole jokes about how, the good thing about Miami that it's very close to the United States, it's different than
the genie's out
place.
The box.
Yes, it's very different than anywhere else. There's a reason people come here. The energy here is different, and that is not something that you can just turn off on a dime.
Yeah. This is always a great conversation. I hope this has given those people watching out there an understanding of the basics of the real estate economy and how it works and its fundamentals. I know there's a lot. There's so many different things. I mean, there's so many systems that are impacting. It's one big, huge ecosystem. Eli, you are a great source of information. I know that you have access to so much data, so many different people. We will take the slides that you did at the React conference and we will share those on the blog. So if you're watching this video, please click below, read the blog article and look at all that data. Okay, this is not just opinions. It's not someone YouTubing that they've got an opinion on the Miami real estate market, or they're moving back because they don't like it, or they're saying it's great because they just really like the neighborhood they live in. This is hard data. Please process it. If you have questions, send them in. If you have a different opinion, send that in too, because we'll try and address the thread accordingly. Thank you all for watching. Eli, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
And as always, stay tuned for another episode of the Better Decisions Podcast.